Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class. Excuse me. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Svikritam cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatar Varishtaya Chate Namaha Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadattatam Bhuvi grinanti ye bhurida jana. So we will continue our reading of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna where we left off last time. And that is a third the way up or a fourth of the way up from the bottom on page 240. And it's on the date June 10th, 1883. This was a Sunday, and it being a Sunday, various devotees had come. Again, on Sundays, because people had off from work, and often on Saturdays also, again, following the British system of the days of the week, or working days of the week, at least Sundays they had off, and so that was a time when many people could come. So this was morning. The narration began at 10 o'clock in the morning, and so this is part way through the morning we come to now. Sri Ramakrishna had just asked Ramlal to sing, and then Ramlal sang. This was another song. Ramlal sang about the love of the gopis for Sri Krishna. Akrura was about to drive Sri Krishna in a chariot from Vrindavan to Mathura. The gopis would not let him go. Some held the wheels of the chariot. Some lay down in front of it. They blamed Akrura, not knowing that Sri Krishna was leaving them of his own will. Akrura was explaining this to the gopis. Ramlal sang the song that is a song about the words of Akrura. Hold not the chariot's wheels. Is it the wheels that make it move? The mover of its wheels is Krishna, by whose will the worlds are moved. So a beautiful sentiment that the gopis had such deep love for Krishna that they couldn't bear the separation from him. It said that the gopis exhausted their karma, became purified of all of their karma. Their bad karma was exhausted through the pain of separation from Krishna, which they felt whenever they didn't see him, much like you see in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. In fact, in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, among many other spiritual moods you see manifested to perfection, you see the attitude of the gopis manifested in the life of Sri Ramakrishna during his sadhana. So their bad karma was exhausted through the pangs of separation, viraha. And then the good karma was exhausted through the bliss of the thought of Krishna, the loving thought of Krishna. So through the bliss of that, the good karma was exhausted. Through the pain of separation, their bad karma was exhausted, and thus they became free. So here, the sentiment of the song is very beautiful, that the gopis are trying to hold the wheels, to try, complaining to Akrura for driving the chariot, for taking Krishna, and then they hold the chariot back, trying to keep it from taking Krishna to Mathura. And Akrura tells them that, do you think it's the wheels that make the chariot move? No, it's the mover of the whole universe, Sri Krishna himself, God himself, who moves everything in this universe, whose will is behind all activity in this universe. He is moving of his own will. And so then, about the gopis, the master said, what deep love, what ecstatic devotion they had for Krishna. Radha painted the picture of Sri Krishna with her own hand, but did not paint his legs, lest he should run away to Mathura. I used to sing these songs very often during my boyhood. I could reproduce the whole drama from memory. So, in the poetry of the Vaishnavas and the stories of the Vaishnavas, the stories of Sri Krishna and in the Srimad Bhagavat and the Vishnu Purana, but especially in the Srimad Bhagavat, where the devotional mood had attained to its fullest manifestation by the time of the Srimad Bhagavata, and then in the poets of the Vaishnavas, or in the poems of the Vaishnavas, this loving devotion of the gopis for Krishna and the cowherd boys for Krishna reached an extraordinary level of poetical imagery, poetical maturity. And so this poetry, you see the poetry of devotion. Devotion is by its very nature poetic. And so this idea of Radha painting Krishna, but not wanting to paint his legs because then he could run away. That is, she saw Krishna in everything. And so painting Krishna, that to her was Krishna. And the very idea that if I give him legs, he may move away. I want him to stay here. So that, again, it's poetry, yes, but it's lived poetry. That is, it's poetry that comes from inner life and experience. After his meal, Sri Ramakrishna sat on the couch. He had not yet found time to rest. The devotees began to assemble. One party arrived from Manirampur and another from Belghoria. Some of the devotees said, "We have disturbed your rest." Master, "Oh no. What you say applies only to a Rajasic man. About him, people say, ah, now he will enjoy his sleep." So this, you see what a high ideal Sri Ramakrishna set. And Swamiji says in one of his hymns to Sri Ramakrishna, he has the line, Karma Kalevaram Adbhuta Cheshtam. He whose work was unceasing and whose efforts were extraordinary. And so again, as I've said on occasion, not often, but I have said before, we don't often think of Karma Yoga and Sri Ramakrishna together. Holy Mother, yes. Swami Vivekananda, yes. The Gita, yes. Karma Yoga. But Sri Ramakrishna, we think of his absorption in devotional moods, going into samadhi, and the highest knowledge as well, Nirvikalpa Samadhi and all of that. But he seems so high, so abstracted, his mind, in such high flights of spirituality day and night, that we don't think of him as a karma yogi, but he was perfected in karma yoga as well. And this shows it, that, and this wasn't one time that he did this. This was day after day for years. When people would come to him, he had no rest. For hours and hours, tirelessly, he would talk to people. And even when he was suffering at the end of his life from cancer of the throat, when it was so extraordinarily painful, he couldn't eat, he could barely drink, and he could hardly whisper anything. But people would come from a distance to see him, and the devotees would try to keep them away from Sri Ramakrishna so that Sri Ramakrishna wouldn't try to speak and thus further injure his throat. but Sri Ramakrishna wouldn't allow it. Anyone who came, he was ready to give some words of instruction, some words of consolation. And so the extraordinary work that he went to. So here he says that a Rajasic man, about him, people say, oh, he's going to enjoy his sleep now. But Sri Ramakrishna was pure sattva. So for him, the idea of enjoying an afternoon nap, that wasn't a part of his consciousness. Yes, sometimes he took rest in the afternoon. Often he would lie, but even then, people would come and sit near him. There are various incidents recorded here, many days when the conversations are recorded, and Sri Ramakrishna would be lying, resting, and even then, people would sit near him and ask him questions, and he would uncomplainingly converse with them. So extraordinary work that he did, and all in the spirit of karma yoga, without any ego, without any selfishness, without any expectation of return, not even the respect of those that he taught, just giving out of the fullness of his heart. The devotees from Manirampur asked the master how to realize God. Master, you must practice spiritual discipline a little. It will not do to simply say that milk contains butter. You must let the milk set into curd and then churn it. Only then can you get butter from it. Spiritual aspirants must go into solitude now and then. After acquiring love of God in solitude, they may live in the world. If one is wearing a pair of shoes, one can easily walk over thorns. So the idea of spiritual practice, that if you want to realize God, you must practice spiritual discipline. And so Swami Vivekananda, following Sri Ramakrishna's ideas and life and his own realizations also, Swami Vivekananda criticized those sects that are found in India as well as in other religions in other places. Those who preach against spiritual discipline, saying that if you practice spiritual discipline, it means you're not surrendered to God. It means you're trying to do something for yourself. You're making an egocentric effort to realize God. So for coming to God, you have to give up all effort and just depend on the grace of God and do nothing. You find that in Japanese devotional Buddhism, where they say that Amitabha, Amida Butsu, as they call him in Japan, the Amitabha, the great Buddha, the mythological Buddha, made a vow that anyone who chants my name even once will be reborn in my paradise, which is described like it's a paradise, a spiritual paradise, that is, where it's like Brahma Loka, where one goes and one never has to be reborn again. There itself, one becomes a Buddha. So one who repeats my name even once, I take a vow that such a person will be reborn in my paradise. So among some of the sects of devotional Buddhism in Japan, they have the idea that one shouldn't even go on repeating the name of Amida Butsu, like Japa, because that means you don't believe in his vow. All you have to do is just to believe that in Amida Butsu's vow, and that's it, finished. You've said it once in your life, that's all. Now you will be reborn in his paradise. Well, that's a terrible cheapening of religion. That yes, in devotional Hinduism also, in the strong schools of devotional Buddhism, it said that if one has enough faith, then yes, repeating the name of God once is enough for liberation. But who has that much faith? Who has that much faith? The proof of it is, if you repeat the name of God once, and then you're absorbed in ecstatic union with God, then yes, it worked. Once was enough. If not, you better keep repeating it. Well, once isn't enough, you better go on repeating it and repeat it throughout your life. Then it will do its work as you repeat it. And so in Christianity, once in my early monastic years when I was in Ganges, Michigan, under Swami Bhashyanandaji, he sent three of us young brahmacharyas to a Christian seminary in Kalamazoo, not Kalamazoo, in Holland, Michigan, Western Theological Seminary. It was a Dutch Reformed seminary. That is, they are Calvinists. And it was wintertime. And so we were wearing dhotis and Punjabis because we were going to speak as representatives of Vedanta, even though we were just brahmacharyas, white Punjabi and white dhoti. But it was winter, cold, deep snow outside, wind blowing, and so we had long johns on also. And so we spoke about Vedanta to the class of seminarians. They were being trained to be missionaries. And so then there was question and answer afterwards. And one of the seminarians said, I see that you are wearing long johns. Practicing austerities will not get you to God. Wearing long johns is not going to help you get to God. At first, it was very confusing. What in the world is he talking about? I didn't wear long johns because it was going to help me get to God. I was wearing them because it's freezing cold outside, and I'm just wearing a thin cotton dhoti. But then I realized he was thinking of the old Christian monks and nuns who would wear hair shirts, that is, shirts made out of horsehair that makes the body itch. And they would do that as a way of practicing austerity. So he thought that was what we were doing. But the idea was that he was expressing was that you can't do anything to come to God, that it's only by grace alone, not through works. That's the great argument in Protestant Christianity, in most branches of Protestant Christianity, that there's nothing you can do which will take you to God. It's only by accepting Jesus and accepting his grace that you are saved. So no spiritual practice whatsoever should be done, because then you are thinking that you can conquer God. No, you can't do that. So again, and there's some Hindu sects who have that same extreme idea that through faith alone you can come to God, and you shouldn't practice spiritual disciplines because that means you don't have faith. And so when you go in these Hindu devotional sects, if you go to a temple where there's an image and you see the image, then you have seen God. You've seen God, and so you've had the experience of God. You're liberated. Nothing else is needed. You've gone to the temple, you've seen the image. The image is God. You've seen God. You are liberated. No, that's foolishness. That's a terrible degeneration of the great ideas in the Hindu tradition and in other spiritual traditions as well, whether it's Buddhist or Christian or Muslim or Hindu. So Sri Ramakrishna is saying you must practice spiritual discipline. You can't just say, well, I'll just have faith that God will do everything for me. Yes, if you have so much faith that God will do everything for you that you do absolutely nothing for yourself, even ready to die rather than do anything for yourself, then God will do everything for you. But if we don't have that kind of faith, it's not going to work. So we have to do spiritual discipline. So you must practice spiritual discipline a little, he says. It won't do just to say that milk contains butter. You have to set it into curd, that is yogurt, and then you churn it, and out comes the butter. So you have to do the work to get the butter. Yes, butter is in milk, but just saying it doesn't bring it. Yes, by praying to Jesus, meditating on Jesus, believing firmly in Jesus as God, worshiping Jesus day and night, absorbing yourself in loving devotion to Jesus, eventually, yes, you can come to salvation. But just saying, I believe in Jesus, that does very little. In fact, it does nothing. It's just hypocrisy. And so just saying, I believe in this or I believe in that, that is a useless exercise. It's what we do. Then he says a beautiful thing that spiritual aspirants must go into solitude now and then, which is a very beautiful statement that he would make often, that by going into solitude from time to time, then the mind becomes firm, our faith becomes firm, and we come out of our usual habitual patterns. And then he says that if you are wearing shoes, you can walk over thorns and it won't hurt you. And that is something that in a different context is said also about wearing shoes. Shantideva, the great Buddhist writer and saint, he said that there are thorns on the paths of the world. You can't cover the whole world in leather so that you can walk everywhere with bare feet. All you need to do is to put leather on your own feet, and then you can walk anywhere. So you don't have to cover the world. And so if you develop discrimination and detachment and other spiritual qualities, then you can go anywhere in the world. So that's basically what Sri Ramakrishna is saying here. In the context of going into solitude, by going into solitude, you strengthen the mind, you strengthen your ability to forbear everything in the world and hold your mind fixed on God. Like once you wear shoes, then you can walk anywhere. You need not be concerned about glass or stones or thorns on the path of the world. Then he continues, the most important thing is faith. And then he quotes a Bengali couplet, as is a man's meditation, so is his feeling of love. As is a man's feeling of love, so is his gain. And faith is the root of all. And then he says, if one has faith, one has nothing to fear. So again, the couplet says, if one, as is one's meditation, so is his feeling of love. So the more we're able to meditate one-pointedly on God, the more we find love developing. So if you want to develop love for God, learn more and more slowly over years. Meditation takes a lifetime to develop. Over years, learn more and more to keep your mind focused on God. And to the extent that you can do that, greater love will begin to grow within you. And then the couplet continues, as is a man's feeling of love, so is his gain. That is, the gain of spiritual realization, the gain of spiritual experience, the gain of the joy of spiritual life. So through meditation, one-pointed meditation, love grows, and through love, one accomplishes everything. But then it says, but faith is the root of all. So why do we meditate? Why do we try to meditate? Why do we keep over and over again, day after day, year after year, keep trying to bring the mind back to God? It's only faith that gives us the power to do that. So in the Christian tradition, there's a very beautiful idea. They make a point of this, a point of the value of dryness in spiritual life. Because all of us on the spiritual path, we experience that for some time, especially in the beginning, we're excited about the promise of spiritual life. And so we feel great joy in trying these new practices, spiritual practices, reading books that we've never read before, trying prayer and meditation and all of that. After some time, we become dry, the heart becomes dry, and there's no enthusiasm in it. And so in Christian mysticism, they say that that is an extremely valuable period, because if you're doing something because you're getting rewarded for it, even a rat will do that. That's the whole basis of many experiments with rats and mice. Teach them if they do a certain trick, then there'll be some food dispensed. And so then they'll do it over and over and over again because they keep getting rewarded. And so if we get rewarded every time we sit for meditation, every time we say a prayer, we're feeling blissful, then what does that prove about us? It proves nothing. We're no better than rats. It's if through long periods and long years we do our practice and we don't feel much. We feel sort of dull and we don't seem like we're going anywhere. And yet we continue. Then we are exercising faith. We're developing faith that yes, I've been doing this for years and I don't feel much progress. But yet I sit again. I'm exercising my faith. So in Christian mysticism, they make a great point out of the value of that dryness. In every tradition, the Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, Christian tradition, they find some points in the spiritual life that they make a point out of. And so in Christianity, that's one of the things that they make a special point of. You've all heard of St. John of the Cross, one of the great mystics of Roman Catholicism, great mystic of Christianity. He talks about the dark night of the soul. And so there are two dark nights of the soul. The preliminary dark night of the soul is that when you're not getting any emotional reward from your practice, but you just go on day after day, year after year. That's the first dark night of the soul. And that, he says, leads to the great spiritual growth. It's not pertinent here, but just so that to complete the thought. The second night of the soul is a higher night, when all thoughts and images of God have disappeared, and there's just the peering into the invisible being of God in darkness. That night of the soul is a very high night of the soul, where all thinking and memory and imagination and all of that has disappeared, and we're just seeking God in the midst of the darkness of the darkness of the heart, seeking that light which we know is there. So that's a very high type of a dark night of the soul. So, a devotee. Sir, is it necessary to have a guru? Master. Yes, many need a guru, but a man must have faith in the guru's words. He succeeds in spiritual life by looking on his guru as God himself. Therefore, the Vaishnavas speak of Guru, Krishna, and Vaishnava. So here, he answers, not that, yes, everyone needs a guru. He says, yes, many need a guru. So that we should remember, that the guru is a great help in spiritual life. And most of us find that we do need a guru, that we need someone to help us, someone who is advanced along the path to help us. But we shouldn't become fanatics and say that everyone needs a guru, because there are many examples of people who became great saints without a guru. Of course, in the Hindu tradition it's said, and I believe it's true, that in the absence of a human guru, God becomes the guru. So still a guru is necessary, but God himself can become the guru of a person. So that's not to discourage one from seeking a guru, an advanced spiritual teacher that one trusts and who gives one guidance, gives one inspiration, gives one a spiritual impulse, a push along the spiritual path. Yes, that's a great thing. But we shouldn't become fanatics about it. So he says many need a guru. But then he says, but a person needs faith in the guru's words. It won't do to get a guru just because somebody says you need a guru, so I'll go get one, just like I go to buy a book that I want to read. So I need a guru, so I go get one, but that's all it is. No, if you are to benefit from having a guru, then you have to have deep faith in the guru's words. So it's better first to get the faith and then to take the guru. Otherwise, it doesn't always happen that way. And I'll be frank about myself. When I went to get initiation, I was just a boy of 20 years old. And I really wanted it. And I saw that Swami Vireshwaranji Maharaj was a great soul. But I wasn't ready at that time. I didn't have the understanding nor the qualities of character and all of that to really believe whatever he said, and to think that it was God himself speaking to me. No, I didn't have that. That came much later. But eventually, we need to have that deep faith in the words of the Guru, that it's the God himself who speaks through the Guru to us. So he says that he succeeds in spiritual life by looking on his Guru as God himself. Therefore, he says, the Vaishnavas speak of Guru, Krishna, Vaishnav. So Sri Ramakrishna would often talk about these different trinities of things that are one in reality. And so once he was talking to Keshav Chandra Sen, saying Bhagavata, Bhagavata Bhakta Bhagavan. That is, that the scripture, the devotee and God are one. That was based on an experience he had once outside the Vishnu temple at Dakshineshwar. He saw that there was a Pandit sitting there chanting the Srimad Bhagavatam with a stand something like this, reading chanting the Bhagavatam in front of the Vishnu temple. And he saw a light coming out of the image of Krishna and hitting the Bhagavata and then hitting the, coming up to the heart of the Pandit. Now, that in itself doesn't mean anything as we describe it. He saw a light coming out of the image. Well, it sounds nice. I'd like to have an experience like that. It'd be something special, something that you don't see every day and ordinary people never see. So that sounds very, very nice. But he understood it to mean because an experience like that, that's a genuine spiritual experience, it conveys the meaning intended in the experience. It's not just seeing a light and thinking, oh, that's cool. No, it conveyed the meaning that that God, that is coming from the image, the scripture, and the devotee are three manifestations of one thing, one spiritual principle. The God, the devotee, and the scripture. And so another thing that he would say is this, Guru Krishna Vaishnava, that the spiritual teacher, Krishna, that is God, and the devotee, that they are all the same reality, three manifestations of the same reality. So once he was saying these trinities to Keshav Chandra Sen. So when he came to this one, Guru Krishna Vaishnava, Keshav Chandra Sen said, let's not go that far. That is, his doctrine of the Brahma Samaj wouldn't allow him to go that far. First of all, they didn't believe in the Guru, even though Keshav Chandra Sen and other teachers of the Guru were set up as teachers, but they didn't believe in the Guru. They didn't believe in the Guru's oneness with God, and they didn't believe in the devotee's oneness in God. That is, they were highly influenced by Protestant Christianity, especially by Unitarian Christianity, which is a very liberal form of Christianity. But certainly not non-dualistic. In fact, Unitarian means that they don't believe in the Trinity, that God is Father, God is Son, and God is Holy Spirit. They believe in the unity of God, that God is only one, and that Jesus was a great man who taught us how to live, how to love, how to worship, but that's all. He was just a man who was an unusually great man. As you find that there are great musicians like Mozart, and then people like me who can pick out a tune on a harmonium, and that's about all. So Jesus was a spiritual genius, but a human being who was a spiritual genius. So that was the influence on Keshav Chandra Sen and the Brahma Samaj, or one of the primary influences. So then he continues, one should constantly repeat the name of God. The name of God is highly effective in the Kali Yuga. The practice of yoga is not possible in this age, for the life of a man depends on food. Clap your hands while repeating God's name, and the birds of your sins will fly away. So one should constantly practice the name of God. So again, this is coming in the context of you must practice spiritual discipline. You must practice spiritual discipline because nothing will come otherwise. Just by sitting and saying, butter, 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 you don't get butter out of milk. You have to turn the milk into yogurt and then churn it, and then you get the butter. And so one must chant the name of God. And then he talks about the glory of the name of God, how important it is, especially now in the Kali Yuga, and this which is considered the most degenerate of the four ages, epochs in human society. This is the most degenerate. And so the chanting of the name of God is most effective because it's easy. Anyone can do it, and you can do it anywhere at any time mentally. You can do it, and when you're by yourself, you can do it aloud as well. or you can do it just by moving your lips, mouthing the words without making a sound. But you can do it anywhere, anytime, in one way or another. But one thing to note that he says here that uh, yoga is not for the present age, meaning Raja Yoga, Patanjala Yoga. So that has to be qualified. That Sri Ramakrishna was talking to devotees who are leading busy lives and so forth. And so, yes, for them, the path of yoga is not appropriate. And for most people leading busy lives in the world today. So we shouldn't take this, like many things, like I've already said about another thing this morning. We shouldn't take this as an absolute, as I said about the guru. This also we should not take as an absolute. And when Sri Ramakrishna says that the path of Narada is the appropriate path for the present age, that also is not an absolute. He was talking to certain people who had a certain understanding, a certain background, and for them and for many people, Narada's way of devotion is the easiest, most natural, the best way. But there are many people for whom that does not work. So Sri Ramakrishna never meant that everyone has to follow one way. That's completely opposed to his whole life and all of his teachings. So for many people, probably the majority of people numerically, the path of devotion is the best. But there are those for whom that won't work, but for whom there is the path of knowledge to which they are attracted. So if that's what you're attracted to and that's what you understand, then do that. So that's not a prohibition that no one should practice anything but devotion, nor is this statement about yoga. That yes, if you want to follow the strict path of yoga, where it's all about the control of the mind and through the practice of pranayama and asana and pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and everything, then you need very special circumstances in life where you can pay attention to the breath all through the day and measure your activities according to the effect on the breath, and then control the breath for hours every day. Do asanas every day. Do practices in concentration, different practices in concentration every day. So you need specialized circumstances. So that's why he says that the path of yoga is not for the modern world. It doesn't mean that you can't do yoga, and it doesn't mean even in your busy life, if you want to do some, yes, it will help you. But if you want to take to the pure path of Raja Yoga, then you need specialized circumstances. And the great majority of people don't have the opportunity to do that. And so that's what he means. Again, I may be overemphasizing this point, but it's important because people make absolutes out of these things and say that, well, nobody should practice yoga because Sri Ramakrishna said. And nobody should practice jnana yoga because Sri Ramakrishna said. Well, no, that's completely contrary to Sri Ramakrishna's overall life and teachings. So we have to take these statements in context of the whole of his life and teachings. So he says, one should always seek the company of holy men. The nearer you approach the Ganges, the cooler the breeze that you will feel. Again, the nearer you are to a fire, the hotter the air will feel. And so, yes, both are two analogies. When it's hot outside, then use the analogy of approaching the Ganges. The closer you come to the Ganges, the more you feel the cool breeze. Or the closer you get to the ocean here in Houston, the more you feel the sea breeze coming and cooling you. And when it's cold, you think in terms of a fire. The closer I get to the fire, then the warmer I feel. So the idea is that when it's hot and we go towards the Ganges or towards the ocean or towards a large lake, we begin to feel the cool breeze coming over the water. The closer we get, the closer we feel, the more we feel the breeze. And so by coming into the company of holy people, we begin to feel the breeze of spirituality. Or again, the other analogy of heat. He continues, but one cannot achieve anything through laziness and procrastination. People who desire worldly enjoyment say about spiritual progress, well, it'll all happen in time. We shall realize God sometime or other. So yes, that Sri Ramakrishna, that attitude Sri Ramakrishna always criticized. So yes, that is the attitude of most people in the world, and it's even the attitude of most of us spiritual aspirants. But do we want truth? Do we really want truth? Do we really want to come to God? Then we need a teacher like Sri Ramakrishna who speaks strong words of truth to us. So he tells us that no, this attitude, hobe, hobe, in time it'll happen, don't worry, it's going to happen, it'll take care of itself. When the time is right, then you'll start your spiritual practice, and everything will be okay. So don't worry about it now. Now's the time for enjoying the world. No. If you begin to feel any longing for God, it's emphasized in the Hindu tradition, then and there begin striving, because you can't tell when that feeling will come back again. That doesn't mean when the feeling comes that I'm sick of this world, I want to renounce it, that you should renounce it. No, that's an extreme step, and you may not be able to follow through with it. There are many stories that Sri Ramakrishna would tell about that. But when you feel a longing for spirituality, then begin to cultivate it, protect it, like you protect a flame in a breezy place. When you're trying to light a flame, and it's a little breezy, you have to protect it to keep the wind away so that the flame begins to grow. And once you have a blazing fire, then you don't have to protect it at all. And so in the beginning, when you feel a little spiritual interest, a little spiritual longing, then recognize that to be a great, great gift. And so cultivate it, protect it. Don't let the winds of the world blow it out. Don't have this attitude that it'll happen in time. The first Indian gentleman the first Indian, whether man or woman, that I ever met was on the next to the last cruise of the old Queen Elizabeth I, the first Queen Elizabeth ship from Southampton, England to New York Harbor. That was in 1968 summer. And on the ship, there was an Indian man that I began to talk to. I'd seen an Indian woman in Sweden a few months before, standing at a bus stop, but she was at a distance, and I had no reason to speak to her, so I didn't. But that was the first time I had ever seen an Indian. This was the second, but this was the first Indian I ever spoke to. So I started to somehow got into conversation with him on the ship and told him that I was interested in becoming a monk. He said, at that time I had somewhat long hair, not long hair, but somewhat longish haired, and I had a childish beard. I was only 17 at the time, or maybe, 17 at the time. So my beard was not very beardy, but a little bit of facial hair. And so he said, well, if you want to be a monk, then you have to shave all of that off. And I said, well, that's not a problem. If that's what I have to do, I'm ready to do that. And then he said, well, that's good. That's very good. But as for me, I'm going to do that at the end of life. And now I'm going to enjoy life and enjoy life and have a good time and make money and all of that. But at the end of life, I'll go to the Himalayas and then absorb myself in meditation. So having seen him for several days on the ship, I doubt that happened. It might have, but I doubt that it happened. The sentiment is good, and I learned to appreciate that, because that shows the depth of culture in India, that these ideas have gone deep into people. So even those who don't do it and don't have the strength to do it, they have the idea that that's what I should do. That at the end of life, I'll go to the Himalayas and lose myself in meditation. So doing it, that's a different thing. But again, I bring it up in this context because it was like this, in time it will happen, in time it will happen. So I'm not bothered about it now. Now I'm going to enjoy life. The problem with that is that if you don't cultivate some spiritual activity at the time when you begin to feel the value of it, then if you wait till old age to start spiritual life, then you find you don't have the energy, nor will the mind cooperate. The mind only goes over, thinking over and over again about all of the past experiences of life, chewing the cud, as they say. And so don't think that that'll happen in time. No, if you have some spiritual inclination, begin then to cultivate the thought of God. And then you can have a family, you can have a profession, you can enjoy things in life also. That's pravritti marga, the outward path. But keeping one hand fixed on God, and with the other hand enjoy the world. That way, in time, because you have cultivated some thought of spiritual things, and you have consciously valued spiritual life and done something with your spiritual life, then later you will find it easier to come back to it wholeheartedly. But if you don't do that and just think, it'll happen in time, doesn't matter, then when you decide in old age to turn to spiritual life, you find that you don't have the power. So whenever that thought comes, then begin to cultivate it then, even if it's just a small part of your life. That small part will become more important later. I said to Keshav Sen, when a father sees that his son has become restless for his inheritance, he gives him his share of the property even 3 years before the legal time. A mother keeps on cooking while the baby is in bed, sucking its toy. But when it throws the toy away and cries for her, she puts down the rice pot and takes the baby in her arms and nurses it. I said all this to Keshav. So again, that idea that the father, sometimes if the son is insistent, the father gives the inheritance 3 years early to the son. The idea being that if we are insistent with God, if we press our demands on God, then God will give us our spiritual inheritance now, or the image of the mother, the same idea expressed in the image of the mother, which he used very often. And that is that the child, as long as it's engaged with his toys, the mother says, I need not bother with the child right now, let me get my household work done. And the baby is entertaining itself. But once the baby begins to cry, the mother comes running. And so as long as we are entertained by the world, God says, as it were, of course this is poetry, but God says, as it were, my child is engaged right now, having a good time, so I'm not going to bother them now. Let them be. But then when we begin to weep for God, then God comes running to us. And so the value of longing is the point that he's making here. He continues, it is said that, let me also mention, he says in the last sentence of that paragraph, I said all this to Keshav Sen. That is Keshav Chandra Sen, as you know, the leader of the Nalavidhan Brahmo Samaj. Sri Ramakrishna made great changes in the life of Keshav Sen. When he first met him, Sri Ramakrishna saw that Keshav Sen had spiritual qualities. He told him that I see that your tail has fallen off at the first meeting. And the devotees of Keshav Sen were highly insulted that he would speak to the great Keshav Sen, who had met the Queen of England and was known all over the world, in such an insulting way to say, I see your tail has fallen off. So they came to throw him out physically. But Keshav Sen, because he was deeper than the others, he saw that this man has something. I want to hear what he says. So he said, no, you leave him. And so then Sri Ramakrishna explained that just as the tadpole, when it loses its tail, then it becomes a frog, and it can come out of the water. It can live in the water or out of the water, meaning that you can live in the water of the world and you can come out onto the shore of God. So you can live in both places. You can live both in the thought of God and live in the world as well. So Sri Ramakrishna saw that Keshav, through all of his experiences and his efforts, not spiritual experiences, his life's experiences, and his developing the Brahmo Samaj, that he had begun to cultivate some real feeling for spiritual things. And so Sri Ramakrishna helped him a great deal what a tremendous thing for someone like Keshav, who was basically an ordinary person in the spiritual sense. He wasn't a great spiritual luminary when Sri Ramakrishna came to him, but he was beginning to develop some spiritual sensitivity. And so then he had someone like Sri Ramakrishna come and culture and nourish and cultivate that spiritual longing that he had until it became something that transformed Keshav in the last several years of his life. It is said in the Kali Yuga, if a man can weep for God one day and one night, he sees him. So that sounds very easy when we first read it, when we first come to spiritual life. We say, oh, all I have to do is to weep for a day and night for God and I can have God. But that means weeping not like an actor learns to weep at command, but weeping because you actually feel the absence of God. To be able to do that for one day and for one night, to continue like that for one day and for one night, that's a tremendous thing, tremendous thing. We're lucky if we can shed a few tears for God once in a while, thinking about the longing for God. But for a day and night, that's much more than it looks like. Feel piqued at God and say to him, you have created me. Now you must reveal yourself to me. Whether you live in the world or elsewhere, always fix your mind on God. The mind soaked in worldliness may be compared to a wet matchstick. You won't get a spark however much you may rub it. Ekalavya placed the clay image of Drona, his teacher, in front of him, and thus learnt archery. So we'll stop here, but I'll explain that a bit. So this is a very rich paragraph. First, feel piqued at God, that you and say to him, you have created me, and now you must reveal yourself to me. That is, Sri Ramakrishna would often say that if you practice spiritual disciplines, and if you strive to attain to God, then you get the right to press your demands on God. If you read a book about God and you're just starting out on your spiritual life and you haven't cared anything about it, but you're just getting interested, and then you start demanding of God, well, you have to show yourself to me, that has no power. But if you have been practicing, if you've been praying, if you've been trying to think of God, if you've been trying to do what you know to do, to your ability, again, not like a St. Francis of Assisi or like a Sri Ramakrishna, but according to your ability, you've tried in your spiritual life, then you get the power, the conviction that, no, I've tried and I'm still not feeling anything. You must show yourself to me. Then your demands on God have some power because they have the weight of your practice behind them. And so feel piqued at God. And he says, whether you live in the world or not in the world, whether you live in the world or you live in an ashram or you live in a forest, learn to fix your mind on God. In the world or outside of the world, whatever, learn to fix your mind on God. And he says that the mind soaked in worldliness can be compared to a wet matchstick. You can go on striking the wet matchstick and then nothing happens. There's no spark from it. But if the mind is kept dry, that is, kept dry from worldliness by thinking about God, then a little strike and the match bursts into flame. So then he ends the paragraph by mentioning Ekalavya. There's a beautiful story in the Mahabharata about this boy Ekalavya who wants to be an archer. And so he comes to Drona and asks him to teach him archery. And Drona rejects him because in those days there was the caste system. And Ekalavya was from a low caste. And so Drona said, no, I want to teach you. Drona was the greatest teacher of archery, and he was Arjuna's own teacher. So Ekalavya, being undeterred, so he's held up as the ideal of devotion to a practice and to a teacher. So he made a clay image of Drona, went back to his place, his home in the forest, made a clay image of Drona, began to worship it every day as his teacher, pray to it, worship it every day. and then practice archery on his own, thinking that Drona is my teacher. And he became so good at archery that when he came back to Drona and demonstrated his skills at archery, Drona saw that he had surpassed even Arjuna. His greatest disciple ever was Arjuna. Of all of the Pandavas and of all of the other students he had had, Arjuna was the greatest. But Ekalavya was even better. So that he was the image of the devotion to the teacher. The story ends somewhat tragically, so I won't tell the end of the story of Ekalavya. But he's the image of the value of devotion to the teacher and of spiritual practice and of concentration. So we'll stop here for today. Let me make announcements, and then if there are any questions, I will try to answer those. For announcements, on Sunday, I will speak in the series on small Vedantic texts on a very small text called Navashloki, that is 9 verses, or a text of 9 made of 9 verses. These are 9 verses taken from the Devi Gita, a text on the Divine Mother, or a text of the Divine Mother, the words of the Divine Mother. And these 9 verses are taken from the Devi Gita as a condensation of the essence of the text. And so that's what I will take up on Sunday, these 9 verses. Then next week, on Tuesday, we'll have the Gita class at 7:30 in the evening, and next Thursday we'll continue this class, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The special announcements for this month, a week from this Saturday, that is November 14th, we will have Kali Puja. And because of the pandemic, the puja will be as usual here in the temple, but we won't have a live audience. We will live stream the puja as we did with Durga Puja. And it will start at 6:30 in the evening, last until 8:30, and then there'll be the arati at 8:30. And then those who wish to come and offer flowers to Kali and to receive some prasad, you can come between 8:45 and 9:15 p.m. So there'll just be a half an hour slot. We're keeping it a short slot because we don't expect a lot of people, because this will be at night. And so not many people will come at night. We don't expect many people, but those who wish to come are welcome to come. We'll only allow one family unit at a time to come in and offer a flower and get prasad, and then the next family can come in. And as we did at Durga Puja. So the other special announcement is that, of course, on Thanksgiving, which is always a Thursday, there will be no gospel class. So the last Thursday of November, there will be no gospel class. Otherwise, the classes will continue as always this month, and the lectures will continue always as this month. So just remember Kali Puja, and then no class on Thanksgiving. So any questions? No questions. So I'll give a closing chant. ॐ निरञ्जनं नित्यम् अनन्तरूपं भक्तानुकम्पाधृतविग्रहं वै ईशावतारं परमेशमिड्यं तं रामकृष्णं शिरसा नमामः।